Small boat crossings of the English Channel have been back in the news this week. That's because a record number of asylum seekers have crossed the Channel this year, or by this time this year, with over 4,500 people making the journey so far, according to Home Office figures. This is part of a wider trend that's seen the number of people claiming asylum in Britain grow sharply in the last few years. The total in 2022 almost reached the previous high in 2002. So back then, asylum claims surged as people fled wars in Somalia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. But small boat crossings in the early 2000s were almost non-existent. That new, more visible form of arrival only took off from 2018, in large part because of new and stronger security on the Eurotunnel, which had been the previously favoured method of crossing the Channel. And it's that visibility which has made small boat crossings a politically explosive topic. This was a Sky News report last summer after 686 migrants arrived in small boats in a single day.
Friday saw the highest number of migrants arriving into the UK after crossing the Channel in a single day so far this year. More than 600 men, women and children risked their lives to reach Britain's shores. Stopping the boats is now one of the Prime Minister's key priorities, and to cut the eye-watering £6.8 million a day hotel bill for housing asylum seekers, the government plans to use former military bases and airfields like this one in Wethersfield in Essex.
That was a report from July last year, and we can expect many more reports like that this year as we head into summer. Now, that's bad news for the Tories in an election year, especially after Sunak made stopping the boats one of his key pledges. And with the Rwanda plan on the rocks, there's a risk authorities look to more crude forms of deterrence. Earlier this week, French border force police were filmed apparently employing risky pushback techniques to stop a boat making the crossing to the UK. A vessel allegedly paid for by the UK as part of a deal with French authorities makes several close passes to the dinghy, as you can see in this clip here. It's a method that campaigners say puts lives in danger. In another video, French authorities are seen employing other heavy-handed methods. Pulling up next to a small boat, the French police threaten those on board with pepper spray unless they turn back. Other methods reportedly used include ramming boats at sea and puncturing inflatables, which does force migrants to swim back to shore. It goes without saying, this makes an already very dangerous route even more dangerous. This year, 9 people have already drowned in the Channel, the last being a 7-year-old girl. That's compared to 12 deaths across the whole of 2023. Since 2015, around 200 people are thought to have died making the crossing. The other form of deterrence the government has focused on is essentially making the lives of asylum seekers miserable if they are successful in getting here. Those seeking asylum in Britain can currently wait years for their applications to be processed, with massive backlogs having been allowed to develop in the system over recent years. And though there have been recent improvements, there are still over 100,000 people waiting to receive a decision on their claim. And while waiting for their claims to be processed, asylum seekers are made to live in limbo. On first arrival, they're housed in processing centres. The facilities are generally designed for very short stays, but people can end up staying for weeks in cramped and overcrowded conditions. After that, asylum seekers are moved to temporary accommodation around the country with no right to work, no access to benefits, and no say in where they end up. And in recent years, that accommodation has taken the form of hotels, with 55,000 people living in them last summer. While there, single asylum seekers must share rooms and can be moved to new accommodation at any time. That means the breaking of social relations that people may have formed, and for families, children losing school places at short notice. And it's not only an unstable form of accommodation, it's costly too, with a price tag of £3.1 billion per year. Last autumn, the government pledged to end the use of hotel accommodation, promising to close 50 of them by January this year. But while some hotels have been closed, many asylum seekers have simply been moved to different ones. This is from a Sky report following asylum seekers' move from one of those closing hotels in January.
What's happening right now? Where are these men going?
These guys are moving from this hotel to another hotel a bit further up north.
We watched as they left Kidderminster in taxis, then arrived 70 miles away at this hotel in Derbyshire, where they'll now be staying.
Sky spoke to one man who was moved between hotels by the Home Office. Hallo from Iraq has waited more than 2 years for his application to be processed.
Switching, so it doesn't change anything, just wasting money, I think.
So why do you think you've been moved?
I think it's just because of the next election, so they want to tell the native people we sorted out the hotels.
It's hard to exaggerate the extent to which asylum has become a political football, and how worsening the condition of asylum seekers in the name of deterrence is regularly used to try to generate political capital. Last year, the government rented the Bibi Stockholm barge to house asylum seekers at a cost of £22 million. As of January, there were 320 people living on the ship. In December last year, one person housed on the ship died, reportedly by suicide. The government is also turning former military bases into asylum centres, like this one at Scampton in Lincolnshire, where 2,000 asylum seekers may be detained. But while these new forms of accommodation have the effect of worsening conditions for asylum seekers, they also aren't cheap. These asylum sites will cost £46 million more than hotels. That's according to the National Audit Office. And what about those who are granted refugee status? Well, even then, the system isn't much easier. Last November, The Guardian produced this report on the work of a refugee charity in Liverpool.
In the last 3 months, homelessness has increased dramatically. When you're being granted refugee status, you have to leave the accommodation within 7 days. It used to be before like 28 days. Even that 28 days wasn't enough. Instead of increasing the days, they decreased the days. So this is a local park here in Liverpool. It's not far from our center as well. Sometimes in this place you see people sleeping here, rough sleeping. Those people are our clients.
I am Iranian, I'm refugee politics. Last night I could sleep there. Look at bed.
By the time you are waiting for a refugee status, the prime time of your life passed. So that means your life is being destroyed. When they come here, they come with the hope that can restart and rebuild their new life here. We should help them to engage in this community.
The government's rush to clear the asylum backlog that they allowed to build up has meant that people with newly granted refugee status have just 7 days to find somewhere to live. It's a policy that led to the number of refugees being rendered street homeless tripling in the second half of last year. Of course, the logic of deterrence means this grim situation might be considered a feature, not a bug, of our asylum system. But does that logic work? Is it really the case that if we make it miserable to be an asylum seeker or a refugee in Britain, less people will attempt to come here? Well, according to the Home Office, it's not. In a 2020 report, they found this: the role of welfare policies, economic factors, and labour market access as potential drivers of migration to the UK is limited, as many asylum seekers have little to no understanding of current asylum policies and the economic conditions of a destination country. Many asylum seekers have no experience of a welfare state, and they expect to be able to work to support themselves. The Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford agrees, saying this: qualitative research in other countries has found that asylum seekers typically do not have a clear picture of what policies will face them after they arrive, and that perceptions of different destinations are formed based on higher level factors, such as a country's overall reputation as safe or welcoming. Research has found that the information that asylum seekers have is often inaccurate. They go on. Another study found that preventative migration policies, particularly those concerned with deterrence, appear to matter little to asylum seekers' choice of destination country. The qualitative research based on interviews with asylum seekers is in broad agreement that asylum policy, especially that concerning the treatment of asylum seekers after they arrive, is not likely to be a powerful tool for influencing individuals' decision-making. And perhaps it's those findings that explain a government announcement earlier this week. The Home Office has launched a series of social media ads in Vietnam to deter small boat migrants. The ads are in Vietnamese, but this is part of an English version. It tries to burst expectations about life in the UK for asylum seekers by telling what it calls the real story of a Vietnamese asylum seeker in Britain. I thought life in the UK would be easy and I could send money home, it says. Living in the UK was very different to what I thought. It was very difficult to get work. In 2023, just over 1,000 Vietnamese people arrived in the UK on small boats. So even if this ad were effective, which seems somewhat unlikely, it won't do much to help Rishi Sunak achieve his dream of stopping small boats coming to Britain. Aaron, I want your thoughts on this. The Tories, they're responsible for a lot of policies that seem both cruel and dysfunctional. So, they're mean and they don't work. Asylum perhaps tops the lot.
Yeah, I think that's right. Rwanda costing several £100 million and nobody's even been sent to Rwanda. I mean, it's almost a joke. And the funny thing is actually with Rwanda, which is, like you say, possibly the meanest policy of all the policies they have. And it's, of course, meant to appeal most of all to the hard right of the Tory voting base. It's precisely that policy which has become a shorthand for why those people don't like the Tories and won't vote for them. Interesting. Interesting that if you try and couch a policy as radically right-wing, authoritarian, dealing with, quote unquote, the migrant problem, and then you fail to deliver, actually that has a huge downside. I think actually the Tories they'd be doing better in terms of polling if they hadn't promised to stop the small boats and if they hadn't engaged in the Rwanda, quote unquote, solution. And I'm not to suggest that their voters don't care about those things. They do care about those things. They probably have very different views on those things to what our audience, generally speaking, does here at Novara Media. But trying to say that this right-wing solution, which you like, will work and then not delivering on it, I think in many ways is probably worse than not doing anything at all. I think if Sunak had simply focused on bringing inflation down, bringing interest rates down, bringing NHS waiting lists down, and a couple of other key indices, which they probably will meet, I think if they'd done that, they would be faring better, which isn't hard, right? Because lots of polls have them between 20 and 25%. Some lower than that even, some even below 20%. So clearly as a sort of policy agenda, talking right, but they're not delivering, doesn't work for them. I was giving a talk recently to a pretty hostile audience on the issue of migration, alongside Matt Goodwin and Konstantin Kissin, and Polly Toynbee as well on my side, although we had differences of opinion as well between us. And I said, look, the facts are that Priti Patel is on migration the most liberal British Home Secretary in history, because of course she had 1.3 million people come here net migration over 2 years. And that is sort of true on a purely quantitative basis. And it really wound people up. And my God, Michael, if you think that the left dislikes or hates the Tories, the right really hates them too. And it's precisely because of this combination, I think, of both mean and ineffective policies, which has really become synonymous with them as a political brand. There is an issue in terms of displaced people. And this will only get worse over the course of the 21st century because of climate change. And I find it strange that progressives or people on the left say, on the one hand, we could have hundreds of millions of climate refugees this century, I think quite likely. And then on the other hand, say, well, we don't need to prepare for that. We clearly do. I think we need a cross-European coordinated response and framework to people claiming asylum. I think at the very least, we also need to have a joined-up foreign policy with regards to minimizing displaced people in our near abroad. I say this to people on the right, they sort of start freaking out. You can't complain about Syrians coming here or Iraqis or Afghans coming here when our own foreign policy choices, particularly in regards to Afghanistan and Iraq, has made those situations worse. You cannot complain. I've heard this time after time. Iranians coming to the UK, and I'll be honest, Michael, some of them are economic migrants. Some are LGBT. Some might be facing repression of some kind. Maybe they're from a demographic minority in the country, but some are economic migrants. And I think this is key. It's very important to say that often people have several reasons for fleeing somewhere. It's not just one thing. And they're not saying, my economic situation is wonderful, but I'm LGBT, or equally, their economic situation may be pretty good, but because they're from a minority, they have to leave regardless. So there tends to be a sort of a confluence of factors as to why somebody would leave. And it's a bit more, sophisticated than we're often sort of led to believe in the media conversation. But some Iranians absolutely come to the UK as economic migrants. Absolutely. And I would say to a right winger who would say, see, Arab Stalian Novara media is saying that Iranians come here as economic migrants. Drop the sanctions. Drop the sanctions. The West has sanctions on Iran to squeeze that country's economy to death. They are some of the harshest, most stringent sanctions in the history of humanity. They've been on that country for 40 years. If I was Iranian, I would do the same. I would do the same. If I was a young Iranian and I don't see any prospects for change, political change in my country, but also at the same time, economic stagnation forever, of course I'd leave. Of course I'd leave. Many of the people whining about this would leave. So I think it's not the whole story. It's part of the story, though. We need, in our foreign policy choices, to think about, are we displacing people? We're seeing it right now in Israel, Palestine. 2.5 million people in Gaza could be displaced. That is the maximalist political agenda of Zionists. There are some people, senior people in Israeli politics, like Israel Katz, who's the foreign secretary, the foreign minister. He's what I think they call him an accessionist. You know, he thinks that Israel should have the West Bank and that maybe Egypt should have Gaza or some of Gaza. So millions of Palestinians should just go to Egypt. And if millions go to Europe, who cares? And I find it really puzzling that you've got people on the right in this country who drone on, wheeze on, whine on, have these asthma attacks about migration and asylum every single day of the week. They can't put two and two together. Oh, I'm supporting a country which may want to displace 2.5 million people in our near abroad. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. They will come to Europe, a great many number of them. So I know it's not the whole answer, Michael, but firstly, we need European cooperation. I know people on the right don't like those words. We need European cooperation around a fair asylum policy, which is fair also for the whole of not just the European Union, but Norway, Iceland, the UK too. We all need to pull our weight. And we also need a joined up foreign policy where we're not trying to destroy countries in our near abroad, not just the Middle East and West Asia, as I just said, but also North Africa too. We have a vested interest actually in these countries doing economically very, very well. We do not want dysfunctional economies in our near abroad and people having to leave. Now, part of that is because of the global economic trading system. That's a big thing to change. Part of it, like I said, is because of things like sanctions and wars and occupation abroad. I think that's the easiest stuff to solve. And by the way, if Iran was opened up economically, if there was a space for political reform, many people would want to live in Iran. I know Iranians that live in Europe and would love to live in Iran. I'm not suggesting that Iran would inevitably go towards that if sanctions were dropped, because a great deal of that rests on the regime too and where it chooses to go. But I really think, Michael, it's a moment for the left actually to make the broader argument for migration policy, asylum policy in this country, and foreign policy abroad.